everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Practical A/B Testing Statistics, 5 tips to help you get help you get more reliable data. Today it's hosted by Unbounce and Hannafin Marketing. My name is Jamie Newton. I am the Communications Manager for Hannafin Marketing, and I'll be your moderator today. Your presenter is Michael Aagaard. He is the Senior Conversion Optimizer at Unbounce. He's been a full-time CRO for the last 7 years. He is an international speaker. He has been all over the place for the last year, and he's the founder of ContentVerb.com. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being on here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started with Michael's presentation, we have just a few housekeeping items. If you want to join the conversation, you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets, or you can send us a question through the webinar question box, which is located there on your GoToWebinar control panel. Let's do a quick poll. We just want to know how you manage your PPC account. So, are you part of an in-house PPC team? Do you do all the marketing, including PPC? Do you work at an agency, or are you a consultant? So if you'll just take a few seconds to fill out that poll question. Hey, Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Well, I've been doing, as you mentioned, I've been doing CRO full-time for about 7 years now. For the most part of that time, I've been doing it on my own as a freelancer. I've also had a couple of stints at agencies, and now I'm here in Vancouver at Unbounce, where I oversee optimization. So my primary tasks here are to continuously conduct research. So we're constantly coming up with new hypotheses for how to move the needle. And then, of course, I also do quite a bit of testing here. I've spent quite a lot of time traveling to different countries, 11 different countries, to speak about conversion optimization. And I started doing this in a time when there weren't a lot of blogs and books and articles and tools. So I did this. I learned it the hard way. I was a CRO cowboy for a while, just experimenting, and I've made so many mistakes. I've learned from them all. So webinars like these, I try to share some experience, so maybe people don't have to make quite as many mistakes as I've made. And one of the big ones is not knowing much about statistics and running, basically really, really bad split tests.
It's amazing how far CRO has come in the last few years. I know even just here at Hannafin, we do CRO as part of our services as well, just not quite as extensive as you, but it's really grown. And for those of you that don't know, Michael is actually one of the top 25 most influential CRO experts. It's a list that just came out from PPC Hero, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I was on the 5th spot. I was on the 18th spot last year, so I'm happy to see that I've moved up.
Moving up. Very nice. Well, let's see what these poll results are real quick. All right. In-house PPC team and agency people, both are at 33%, 23% of you that do all the marketing plus PPC, and 10% of you that are consultants. So awesome. Thanks for being on today, guys. So without further ado, Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Taking a pretty hardcore topic here and try to boil it down. And really what this webinar is about is answering this question: when can I stop my A/B test? This question comes in many different forms. When is my test cooked? When do I know I have reliable data? So on and so forth. But it's one of the most common questions that I get about testing, and it's one of the things that, in my experience, people have the most difficulty with. And I definitely had a lot of difficulty with this particular aspect. And it is, of course, very, very central. So when can I stop my A/B test? Well, really, it kind of goes back to the fundamental question of why run an A/B test in the first case, right? Well, the real reason why we're doing that is to get a representative picture of how a variant would perform if implemented permanently, in the wild, for real on your website. And the key word here is representative. We need to know that this is actually, as close to a true representation as possible, right? So that's where it gets tricky. And there are no 100% rules for this and that. It's a lot of if and buts and depends. But what I'm going to do today, right now, is I'm going to give you 5 tips that will definitely help you make better choices, or just think a little bit more deeply, a little bit more nuanced about this stuff. So let's start with the first tip here. First tip is do not use 95% significance level as a stopping rule. And I used to do this, and I know many people who still do, and it's a big misunderstanding. And a lot of these testing tools, well, now they've shifted to Bayesian testing. We're going to be talking about frequencies testing today, but the tools have kind of, for a long time oversimplified stuff, and people get the idea that as soon as you have like a 95% significance level, well, that means that you have solid data. That's not the case. And I'll just show you an example here. Here's an example of a split test where after 1 day, we have a significance level of 97%, and we have a lift of 151%, right? Totally solid data after 1 day. Awesome, let's implement it. Yeah, but on the other hand, we have a pretty small sample. We only have 655 visitors and 18 conversions. So is that really enough? If we're looking at cold numbers, pure statistics here, well, then basically it is. But let's just see what happens here. After 2 days, oh, now we only have a 98% lift. We have a 95% significance level. Sorry, I wrote confidence there. It should be significance level. We have a little bit bigger sample. Well, after 1 week, damn, we hardly have any lift at significance level of 50%. Damn it. And you'll see we have a bigger sample. Well, after 2 weeks, well, now we're at 18%. Confidence level or significance level of 77%, and after 4 weeks, a 36% lift. And we're at 96%, right? So you'll see it's been all over the place. And now after 4 weeks, it's starting to get more realistic, right? We have a bigger sample, and we have a smaller lift. We still have a decent significance level here. I don't know why I wrote confidence there. But you'll see this development here, and this is very, very natural because as your sample gets bigger, as you get more data, you're going to get a more accurate picture. But even with the sample this size of 122 conversions, I'd be very careful, with trusting this data. And a way to check up on that is to do, to calculate what sample size you would need to detect the lift that we're seeing here, the 36% lift here. So you should really do this before you start running the test, so you have an idea. So, for example, you can go to evanmiller.org and use his sample size calculator. So you put in the baseline conversion rate, you put in the minimum detectable effect. You have to make sure that you set it to relative, not an absolute difference. Then you can set your power and your significance levels, and then it'll tell you how much you need. So in this case, we really need 34,304 visitors in total to be able to detect this lift. And right now we only have 9,396. So we're really missing 73% of the required sample size. So numbers like this you're taking if you're calling it on a sample that size. And also what I wanted to illustrate with this example is that you're going to hit false positives. It's natural. And people talk about AA testing and stuff and get all dramatic about, oh, I had a false positive. Well, of course, that's what happens because you need a big sample to have certain reliable data. So here's a nifty little tool you can use. This one is really, really smart, I think, because in this one you put in your control conversion rate, your expected improvement, and then you can put in how many visitors your test page gets per week and how many weeks that you have, in this case, to test to run this test, right? And then it'll spit out, it'll tell you, well, in order to, with the numbers you gave us, you would have to run this test for 16 weeks in order to detect that lift, right? And then it also tells you that if you want to pull a test like this off based on these numbers, in 2 weeks, you would have to have a minimum relative improvement of 63%, right? So that kind of informs you. That means that if we're looking for a lift of 63%, we have to do something radical because that's a big lift if we only have 2 weeks to test. All this stuff will help you, mitigate risk a little bit better and understand kind of what's going on and what to expect before you start your test. I just have 2 quotes here that I think are really good from a statistician that I have read a lot of books by, Deborah J. Rumsey. Formulas don't know whether they're being used properly, and they don't warn you when your results are incorrect. So you have to understand how to use this stuff. And split testing is not a magical tool. It's just a tool. If you don't use it right, it's going to backfire massively. Another quote I like here, building on this, is that real accuracy in statistics depends on the quality of data as well as on the sample size. The two main things to look for, okay? So I'm just going to expand on that a little bit in the next tips. I just want to round this first tip off with just giving you a couple of things that I would definitely suggest that you read up on or that you get familiar with, and that is statistical power, power levels, p-value, margin of error, confidence interval, and null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Look this stuff up, and when you start understanding this, it will give you a much more nuanced picture of your testing statistics. Okay, so tip number 2, this is building on what we talked about before. Make sure you collect enough data to yield meaningful insight. Okay, so now we're talking about two different things. We're talking about sample size, but another very important thing is test duration, because again, going back to the first point, we want a representative picture of testing. So even if you can get your sample size, the required sample size in an hour, I would be very careful with that, because are you really going to say that that 1 hour is going to be representative of, for example, a full business cycle? I think not. So what I suggest is that you run your tests for full weeks and for full business cycles, because that accounts for all the variance that you're going to see in there. And there's a big, big difference, for example, in e-commerce between how people shop on weekdays and weekends. I used to run tests where I run a test like Sunday and Monday, stop it when it hit 95%, run the follow-up experiment Tuesday to Thursday, yoo-hoo, and then from Thursday to Saturday, and then I compare it all. You can't compare that stuff. So what do I mean by full business cycles? Well, you can go to analytics and get an idea of it. For example, for Unbounce, we have a weekly business cycle. If you look at our conversions, this is basically, with a little variance, this is basically what happens every single week. So we have a weekly business cycle. So when I run tests on Unbounce, I want to make sure that I have at least 2 business cycles. And with important tests, I'm much more comfortable running it for 4 full weeks. This is just an illustration of how a lot of tests kind of develop. So you'll see week 1, we still have a strong winner. Week 2, not quite as strong. Week 3, a lot weaker. Week 4, completely tanked. And now, the control is actually performing better than the treatment. So this is just to give you a picture of how it develops. And if you call the test in week 1, yeah, in this case, that would be a really, really bad decision, because you need to have all this in your consideration. Now, this is what I look for. We're talking about stopping rules, and again, there's a lot of ifs and buts and maybes, but generally this is what I look for when I run tests here at Unbounce. I'm looking for a test duration of 2 to 4 weeks, sample size, when you're talking about users, of the pre-calculated sample size that I need, using the tools I showed you before, and then I want at least 400 conversions, okay? And this is because a lot happens within the first 400 conversions, so you need a lot of actions to really be able to make a decision, right? It's not enough to have 50,000 visitors if you have 1 conversion. That will not tell you anything, so you need actions in there as well. I look for a significance level of 95% or higher, and then I want a power level of 80 and a p-value of 0%. I'm not going to get into power and p-value right now because that would take too long. I'm just mentioning these facts that I look for. Okay, so this brings us on to the next point here. Be careful with averages, they hide the truth. So this goes back to the quality of data. Now, I used to kind of laugh at offline experiments where they'd have a sample of, 30 people or 100 people. I go, ha, 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 ha. When I run tests, I have 30,000 or 10,000 people in my sample. But what I didn't understand was that the offline experiments were very controlled, because they were very, very careful choosing their sample size. And that is difficult, or not the sample size, their sample, what is in the sample. And one of the problems online is that we have very, very polluted data in many cases, especially if you are if you're just looking at the averages, right? So really, this is what happens. You have an experiment page, and if you're just running it with all the traffic, you're going to have different devices, different browsers, different channels, countries, days of the week, hours of the day, user types, different motivation, campaigns, age and gender, all these different things, are in your sample, right? And if you're treating all this as the same, well, then you're going to have, data that's very, very polluted and a poor quality of data, and that is going to make it much more difficult for you to get, proper insight. So I'd be very aware of this. And one way, or one example of this is a form here, right? This is what it looks like on mobile. So we want to run a test on this form. If we run it across the board on all devices, that might, actually present a little bit of trouble, because this is what it looks like on desktop. A completely different experience. So if we're running the test across these two without being aware of it, and we're just looking at the average, well then we're not really testing the same hypothesis anymore. There's a lot of behavior we can't account for. So just be careful with that. One way to get around with this is to integrate your test data with your web analytics setup, for example Google Analytics, because then you can segment like crazy and get the full picture. So I don't really look at the data that my split test tool spits out. I integrate with Analytics and I get everything from there. There are different ways of doing that. Most tools have built-in functionalities. An easy way to do it is to use events. You have an event firing on each variant, and then you can get all the goodness that your analytics setup will give you. And then you can really get the full picture of how your test influences all these different aspects of your sample size. For example, is it the same on mobile, on desktop and tablet? What about different browsers and so on? It's also a good way of figuring out whether your test is broken. If one browser, for example, Chrome is wildly underperforming, you might have a problem there. Another thing you can do is actually just to consider before you start testing, what device are we going to test on, what channel are we going to run the test on, what campaign, what kind of user type, because then you're cleaning up your sample here and you're becoming much more aware, and you're really reducing a lot of noise by making sure that you understand this stuff, and then by segmenting or just running your test to only target a certain audience. This brings us to the fourth tip. Formulate a clear test hypothesis. I use this one as the fourth tip because I wanted to emphasize some of the other ones first, but really this is super important also, and this is really what you should start with. And I'll give you an idea of how to do this. There are a couple of things you need to consider, a couple of things that you need to have present in your hypothesis. That is the reason why you want to make a change. Why do we think that we need to make this change? What is it that we want to change? What is the impact we expect to see? And how will we measure this impact? So I have this little template here that I developed with my friend Craig Sullivan, and this one makes it very easy to actually build a solid hypothesis, test hypothesis. So first off, you say, because we saw this data or feedback, we expect that making this change will cause this impact, and we'll measure it using this data. So now you have what informed the decision. That should be data, real feedback. What change, what impact, and how you're going to measure it. So here's an example of how you could fill it out. Because exit surveys indicated that saving money is most important to our users, we expect that tweaking our value prop to reflect this will cause more people to fill out our lead form. We'll measure this using form submission rate as a key metric. And then if you want to get a little bit more advanced, I would add another thing here, and that is how long you're going to run the test for. We expect to see reliable results in 4 weeks. Now you can always return to this hypothesis and kind of understand what was it we're testing, and why were we doing this, what were we expecting to see, and how long we're going to run this test for. So return to this after you run your test and make sure that you actually did what you set out to do. And then the last tip I have today, the fifth one, very quick, is learn statistics. It makes all the difference in the world. One of my biggest mistakes was that I started, doing A/B testing without understanding anything about statistics. I am by no means a master of statistics. I am still learning. Luckily, I work at a company where we have a guy with a PhD in string theory that can help me. We also have a data analyst with a master's degree in statistics. So I'm working hard to understand advanced statistics. I really think that all marketers should understand statistics because it's such a big part of the work that we do. A great way to start is with this book by Deborah J. Rumsey that I quoted before. It's a great book, and it's not, only full of formulas. There's a lot of actual text in there, a lot of explanations, and just reading this book from cover to cover will make your life so much easier. So really, I'd say don't focus on learning about split testing. Focus on learning about statistics. That was my last tip. thank you very much for listening today, for joining, and let's go to live Q&A if you have any questions.
Hey, Michael, great presentation. Before we get started on the live Q&A, had a couple people ask. We will be sending the recording and slides tomorrow through email, so make sure you are on the lookout for that. Real quick, we just have a couple of questions. Somebody had asked, what do you mean by sample size in relation to PPC? This was more near the beginning of your presentation.
Sample size in regards to PPC, well, when I'm talking about sample size, I'm talking about the amount of users, visitors, whatever you want to call them, clicks, that you have in the sample you're looking at. So really what we're doing is, with running a test like this, we can't run it on everybody on the full population, because that's basically anyone who could ever visit, our website or our campaign or click our ads. So in order to get like an idea of how, whatever we want to test, how that will perform, we have to take a sample. So that's like if you're cooking, if you're cooking soup in a huge pot, right? Then you want to make sure, you want to test it. You want to make sure that you're headed in the right direction while you're cooking it. So you have a taste, and that's the sample. So based on that taste, you're judging the whole, judging the whole pot. If you only just take the top layer where there's just basically just water, that is not going to give you a very good idea of the whole pot. If you put the spoon all the way to the bottom and mix it up a little bit, you get a better taste, right? It's kind of the same thing with the sample. So if for PPC, that is how many, if you're testing a landing page on a specific campaign, then sample size there would be the amount of users, visitors you get there, and also the amount of actions, of conversions.
Very good. We'll do just one more. What if a website has so few conversions that it will take 6 months to gather statistically significant data? She says it's frustrating and it almost doesn't seem worth doing, but that's the wrong attitude. What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
I think that's absolutely the right attitude, because one important thing is that, split testing is not for everybody. You should use, and CRO, LPO, whatever, and split testing are not one and the same. Split testing is just a tool. It's only a tool that you have at your disposal. It's not mandatory. It's not like the CRO police are going to show up and say, hey, you didn't do any A/B testing. You should only use it when it's helpful. And if you don't have enough, traffic to get a proper sample size to give you good data, then there's no point in doing it. And if you're going to have to run a test for 6 months, it just makes no sense at all. So what do you do then instead? Well, then you do really, really careful research. And that's what I'm trying to preach now also is, man, don't focus on split testing. Don't focus on building test hypotheses. Focus on building optimization hypotheses. Do solid research, really understand what's going on, and then you can implement changes and track them over time if you have, if you don't have enough traffic. Another thing you could do is, if you want to test, you could do something that is, site-wide on the website. Something that your research indicates that site-wide will make a difference, so you can have a bigger sample, or instead of maybe measuring the final conversion, the sale, something you could maybe measure click-through rate, and then just be aware of what's happening with the sales also. There are different ways of doing it, but I would say if you have less than less than 500 real conversions a month, I would probably stay clear of split testing. And this is some important stuff to talk about, and not many people talk about this, and it's simply wrong to preach that everybody should split test. It's just wrong.
Great question, Stacy, and thank you, Michael. Great advice for her. Unfortunately, guys, that is all the time we have for today. If you do have some more questions for Michael, you can reach out to him on Twitter. He's @contentverb. Michael, if you'll go to that last slide, if you have any feedback for us today, or if you do have more questions for Michael and don't have a Twitter account, we can also forward those along. You can reach us at marketing@hennepinmarketing.com. And thank you very much for being on the webinar today. Michael, thanks for joining us. Great presentation. And see you later, guys.
Bye-bye.